Well, one of the nice things on going on vacation for us, especially where we usually go for vacation, is I get to do some fishing, and that's always kind of neat. And as I was fishing last week, it kind of reminded me of a story about a guy who he wanted to get into fishing himself, and he was very excited to get into fishing. So what he did was he attended all these seminars to learn all the techniques. He went to all these shows in the wintertime and watched TV episodes and YouTube to learn how he could become a better fisherman. He worked overtime in his job so he could buy the best fishing equipment. And soon he was ready to go on his first fishing outing. And he was so excited. He went out and he set his gear up and he casted out, the perfect lure. It was one of his most expensive lures. And he cast it out and he's just waiting, for that big fish and instant success. And minutes started turning into hours as he sat there. And he started to say, well, maybe I'm not trying hard enough. So he did more casts and he changed every lure and tried everything in his tackle box and made sure his hooks were sharp and everything. And still, he was without even a nibble. And he started to get discouraged. And then he noticed there was a guy nearby watching him. And when he looked at the guy, he recognized the guy as the owner of the local tackle shop. So he was an expert. So he kind of called him over and he says to the guy, hey, I've been out here all day. I've been trying everything I can possibly do. I haven't even gotten one nibble. Maybe you could help me. And the guy says, I've been watching you for hours. You're putting in the time, and I look at your equipment. You have all the right equipment, all the right bait, and everything like that. He said, but maybe I can offer you one thought as to why you're not catching, if you'd allow me. And the guy goes, sure. He goes, well, you realize you're fishing in a parking lot, right? Not a lake. Have you ever kind of felt like that fisherman, where you feel like you're doing everything right and you're putting a lot of effort into something, but you're putting all that effort into the wrong place? Or maybe you're fighting the wrong battle. You see, because we all fight different battles in life, don't we? And not just fishermen or anything like that. We fight battles in real life. Maybe it's a battle or a struggle to change a pattern of behavior we notice in our life, and we say, I keep repeating the same thing over and over. I gotta see change in my life. Or maybe it's we just want to get better, or we want to find fulfillment, or most of all, we want to be authentic in our life or acceptable to God. And we say, man, I want God, I want to know that I'm accepted by God, and I need to work at this. And despite all of our best efforts sometimes, despite willpower, and we put our head down and we say, well, we got to do it, and we discipline ourselves. We write lists out. If you're a list person, you say, I got to just follow this list and I'll be okay. Or we read how-to books and we do all these things, right? Yet we see minimal progress. And no lasting change. And we start to get frustrated or tired and sometimes even ashamed. Have you ever been there? Well, what if in trying harder, we're fighting the wrong battle? What if, like this fisherman, we're putting in great effort, but we're doing it in the wrong place? And sometimes that frustration lies in that. What if our battle to get better, it's not a battle to change or improve our outward actions or outward behaviors, but it's supposed to be a battle to change our heart and to see heart change. When Jesus walked this earth 2,000 years ago, sometimes we look at Jesus and we're like, man, he was just a big lovable hippie, wasn't he? Kids loved him, and he walked around and you're like, hey, peace and love, grace to everyone, Sometimes we picture Jesus like this, and we forget that Jesus did get confrontational. He threw over tables and things like that, and he would confront people sometimes. And a lot of times, some of his most intense confrontations were with those who were fighting the wrong battles, and those that were leading others to fight those wrong battles. And one day, he confronted some of these people, and they were the Jewish religious leaders. These were the people that should have known better, and these often were the people that Jesus would confront. And these Jewish religious leaders, they loved rules and outward appearances. They loved to judge others for not measuring up to those outward appearances. But Jesus saw through their smokescreen. He saw right through them. And in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 23, he has all of these things that he kind of confronts them with. And he does some things that seem very un-Jesus-like. I mean, he calls them brood of vipers. He calls them whitewashed tombs. And here in verse 25, here's what he says to them. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You know what he's saying? He's saying, shame on you. Shame on you guys that are the religious leaders. He goes, you're a bunch of hypocrites. You're frauds. You're fakes. He says, here's what you guys do. You clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence. Now, what the Pharisees would do, and some of the ceremonies they would do, they would have a cup and a plate, and they would use it for the ceremony, and they would spend a lot of time making sure it looked nice on the outside, but often they neglected to do anything inside. But Jesus is talking about more than just tableware here. He's talking about their lives. And what he's saying here, he says, you put all your time into making yourself look good on the outside, and you're neglecting what's inside. And inside is horrible. It doesn't match what you're trying to portray. And that's what a hypocrite is. They're trying to portray something different than what they are. And so he's saying, you're trying to act like you have it all together. This faked goodness in front of people while you aren't those things. You're neglecting real change. Basically saying, you know what you're doing? You're performing. And when we perform, you know what happens? The truth usually always comes out. We can't perform long, can we? We can't fake it long. And that's what he tells them. And he says, we can change our outward behaviors. We can do that. We can discipline ourselves for a while in our actions. But if we neglect our hearts, the truth eventually comes out. And we show that we're really wasting our time because lasting change will never happen. So Jesus calls these religious leaders, he calls them blind fools in the next verse. He says, you blind Pharisee, you don't see it. So let me offer you the solution to what you're missing. He says, you know what the solution is? First clean the inside of the cup and the plate, that the outside may also be clean. So here's Jesus' solution. He says, you know what? Revert back to your heart. Address your heart issues first, and then changed outward behavior is going to follow. And I want you to notice something. Jesus doesn't tell them, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, and then work on cleaning the outside of it. He doesn't say that, does he? He says you clean it, and the outside will be clean. Do you know what Jesus is saying? If you address your heart first, changed behaviors will naturally follow. They'll just come out. You can't help but do that. It's like falling in love. Do you remember when you're in love? You don't have to have outward behaviors to express your love. You don't have to have a list, do you? With your wife, to tell her you love her, to do something that just naturally happens, doesn't it? Why? Because your heart was changed. And that's what Jesus is saying here. That's what it means to address your heart. And maybe you're in a battle like this morning. Sometimes we can think that things are going great, or we want to make things appear that they're going great in our lives when they might not be. And so we try to make it on the surface that we're doing good, while inside, we're full of pain or shame, doubt, maybe failure. And we're afraid to let anybody see that. So we work hard. We work hard on making sure nobody sees that and keeping up good appearances. And people say, how are you doing? I'm doing fine. And, we want to make it seem like we have it all together. And we come to church and say, I'm going to put on holiness at church, And then we drive home and we're like doing all kinds of things in the car, right? Yelling at people and all these kinds of things. And sometimes we put up all these times, but our heart gets neglected. Yet that's where the battle lies. In the heart. The battle for real life in Jesus. Real life with others. Real change and real growth in our life. That battle is fought in our heart. And these heart battles, to kind of see real change in our lives, and if we want to see victory in areas where we feel defeated, we need to address our hearts. But I don't know if you're like me. When I was a kid, I always had a messy room. Did you always have a messy room as a kid? My mom used to always come in my room, clean up this mess! And eventually she would get serious enough that I'd say, I better clean this up. But then I'd look at my room and I'd be like, where do I even start? I don't even know where to start. And sometimes when maybe you're hearing this and you're like, all right, I got to work on my heart. Where do I even start with that? How do I address my heart? What does that mean? Fortunately, you know what? God gives us a roadmap to our hearts within 10 simple rules. Actually, you may know them as the 10 Commandments. We've been going through the book of Exodus here at Joy, and we've been walking through that over the last several months and tracing out how God delivered his people, Israel, out of slavery in Egypt. And then he says, I'm going to not only deliver you from slavery, I'm going to teach you to walk with me, and I'm going to lead you back to my promised land for you. So God delivers them from slavery. Now they're in the wilderness. He takes them through the Red Sea, and he provides for their needs in the wilderness. And by chapter 20, which is where we kind of left off in our series, and we'll resume that after this, but we left off in Exodus chapter 20, and they come to a mountain called Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. And he says, I want you to settle here for a while. And 2 weeks ago we saw God calls Moses up to the mountain and says, I need to talk with you, Moses. And while Moses and God are together, God gives him some instructions for practical living, just some things of how you're going to live together, and gave them some instructions for worshiping him better and how to set up our worship more formally and some things like that. And then he carves into 2 tablets of stone 10 commandments for Moses to share with the people. And we read them earlier in the service. Rob read them a little bit earlier today in the service. And these rules, these 10 commandments, they became what the Jewish people called the law, right? So when the Jewish people all through the New Testament, you hear the word, the law that does this. Well, it became that. In fact, the Jewish people, they learned these 10 commandments, right? And they committed to it. But you know what happened as time goes on? These 10 rules became 10 rules of behaviors to follow to be right with God. You see, if we follow these 10 rules, then we'll be good with God. And the thought was that if you obey these things with your actions, God will be happy with you and will be good. However, this rule keeping, it led to a very outward focused religion. By the time Jesus comes on the scene, that's what the Jewish religion had become about. A bunch of rules. And the religious leaders of the day, these Pharisees that we just addressed, that's what they became, the keepers of the rules. And so when you were involved in the religion, it was all about, well, you better do this, and you better not do this, and you better do this, and you better look right. And it became very much obey the letter of this law. And the 10 commandment keeping had become the new religion. And even today, when we talk about the 10 commandments, even people that don't have a relationship with Jesus, they look at the 10 commandments and say, well, these are things we should all follow. In fact, if I follow these things, maybe I will be right with God. And so we try, right? And even within the church, we use these rules, these 10 commandments, as a measuring stick of what a good Christian should be doing and not doing. Unfortunately, you know what that's all led to? It's led to us focusing on appearances over everything. I need to keep up appearances. I need to perform. I need to look like I'm doing it right. And rule keeping up appearances, it's become the goal of what it means to be a good Christian in many circles. And if you fall short in just one area, well, then just hide it. just hide that area and so that you can keep appearing that you're good. But was that God's intention with giving these 10 commandments? Was that what God was getting after? Saying, I want to give you a list of do's and don'ts, because that's what life with me is all about. Do's and don'ts. And a lot of times people on the outside, that's how they look at what it means to be a Christian. Oh, you're just a bunch of do's and don'ts. Is that what the 10 commandments is all about? We're merely outward behaviors to keep and to perform? Were they simply a matter of our effort that we put into it? And our disciplines as a means of being right with God? I don't think so. In fact, the Apostle Paul, when he writes a letter to the Romans, he talks about this law. And he says, I want to tell you the purpose of the 10 commandments, or the purpose of this law. And he says, for by works of the law, or by obeying the law, no human being will be justified in God's sight. Since through the law comes knowledge of sin. Here's what Paul's saying with this. These commandments, they don't make us good. Obeying these commandments won't make us good. Why? Because none of us can keep them perfectly. Think about these 10 commandments as we read them. Have you ever failed in one of these areas? I looked at it, I had one. No. We fail a lot in these areas, don't we? And we don't keep it perfectly. Yeah, we can do all right, but all right's not good enough for God. None of us can keep it perfectly. So that can't be it. So Paul says, so what is the purpose that God gave us the 10 commandments? You know what it was? To expose that we can't. That we can't do it perfectly. Actually, the purpose of the 10 commandments, the point of it all, is to expose our heart. That our heart can't, because our heart, and we have sin in our heart, we can't do what we want to do. We can never be good enough. And you know what? Jesus helped clarify this about the 10 commandments, because Jesus talked a lot about the 10 commandments. In fact, he said, hey, I haven't come to throw away the 10 commandments. I've come to fulfill it, or to show you what it's all about. And so he helps clarify this. And he says, the heart's role in the 10 commandments is a lot bigger than you think. And the 10 commandments are a lot more serious than you could ever imagine. In Matthew chapter 5, here's what he says. You've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. That's one of the 10 commandments, isn't it? And he says, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment, right? So it's wrong. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Same words, isn't it? Guilty of murder. Where does anger come from? It comes from our heart. So what's Jesus saying? Anger comes from our heart. So murder is a sin of the heart before any action is acted upon. It's in our heart. And in that same discussion, he says more about the 10 commandments. Look down to verse 27. He says, but you've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. Okay, adultery, having sex outside of marriage. Outside the one you're married to. And Jesus says, you've heard that said. It's one of the commandments, right? But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her. Where? In his heart. Ooh. Jesus wasn't rewriting the 10 commandments. You know what Jesus was doing? He was explaining them. And he says, these are a lot deeper. It's not about outward appearances. It's about our heart. You see, the 10 commandments go so much deeper than mere outward behaviors. A bunch of do's and don'ts, right? They actually expose and challenge the deepest desires and the struggles of our hearts. And it's from our hearts that these actions originate. That's where it comes from our heart. And it's from our heart it's our heart that is what God examines when he's looking at us as being holy or good enough or not good enough. But you know what? It's also our heart where healing begins. From God. And that change that he makes in our heart springs to real life as he then resides in us. It's kind of like the 10 commandments then are kind of like stepping into the ring in a 10-round prize fight. And that these 10 commandments, they reveal the greatest battles we face in life. So that's why we have our series that we're starting today. It's called Going 10 Rounds in the Fight of Your Life. And we're going to get to the heart of God's 10 commandments, where we're going to examine these 10 commandments and the heart struggles that they expose. In fact, what I want to do real quickly before we kind of close out is I want to give you a little sneak peek at each of these rounds of the battle, because we read through what these commandments are. But I want to give you a sneak peek about what they really reveal in us, because I want you to ask yourself, oh, can I identify with that struggle in any way? So we have the first round. We're going to look at first round next week. It's that commandment. Commandment number 1. You will have no other gods before me. You know what that struggle of our heart is? Where God's really getting at that? It's our desire, our heart desire to be number 1. For us to be in charge. That's why he says you have no other gods, especially yourself. You ever want to be God? Say, I could do this better? Round 2 of this fight. He says, don't have no graven images, right? No idols. You know what that is? It's our struggle to manipulate life. Have you ever tried to manipulate life? You just want to follow a couple steps and do it this way, or follow something. And a lot of times we do that when we make idols, and we're going to talk about that. But have you ever had the heart struggle to manipulate life for your own gain? Round 3, don't take God's name in vain. That's the struggle for the easy way. You ever want to struggle and just do it the easy way? Not have to think about it? Round 4, keeping the Sabbath day. That's our struggle with priorities. With God's priorities. And it's interesting because Jesus, when he talked about the greatest commandment, he was asked what is the greatest commandment. He says, the greatest commandment is to love God. And he says the second commandment is just like it, love your neighbor. And in these 2 commandments are all the commandments. And it's funny because the first 4 commandments are about our struggle to love God. And these next 6 are all about our struggle to love others. And look at number 5. Round 5. Honor your parents. That's our struggle with authority. None of us ever struggled with our parents as authorities when we were kids. I know, but other people have. I've heard about it. Anyway, round 6. Don't murder. That's our struggle with hostility. With anger. Round 7, don't commit adultery. That's our struggle with purity. Or struggle for purity. Round 8, don't steal. That's struggle for integrity when no one's watching. Round 9, don't bear false witness. You know what that is? That's our struggle to trust that the truth is good enough. And then round 10, don't covet your neighbor's things. Don't want that. Why? That's our struggle for wanting more, wanting what's not ours, those things that aren't ours. I don't know about you, but I can identify with several of these struggles. Actually, all of these struggles. I don't know if you can, but what we're going to do in this series is as we examine these heart battles more closely over the next several weeks, I hope you start to look at these and you can start to name some of these struggles for yourself. Wow, I do this. This is a giant in my life. This needs to change, not our outward actions. My heart needs to change before any outward actions can come. And when we start to name those things, guess what happens? God starts to change us. God changes our heart. Why? Because only God can change a heart. And we're going to see real and lasting change in the way we live our lives. Why? Because victory doesn't come through self-effort. It doesn't come from discipline or trying harder. You know what real change in our lives comes from and victory comes from? Trust. Trusting Jesus. Because Jesus is the one who fulfilled all of this. Jesus is the one who earned victory through all of this. For us. But in order for us to kind of address all of these things, we need to be prepared to fight. So I hope you all came prepared to fight over the next several weeks as we look at these things, and you're ready for it. In fact, kind of as we close this morning, I want to offer you some of the tools when you enter a ring. When a boxer goes to enter the ring, he's got his gloves, he's got his shorts, he's got those big boots they wear and all those things, and they get themselves a mouthpiece to protect themselves, and they have things that they bring with them that are necessary for a fight, that are crucial tools as they enter the ring. And as we enter this ring to battle for our heart, there's some crucial tools that we need going in before we step into the ring. So I just want to kind of share these things because we can't win the battle for our heart without these things. Without, first of all, courage. We step in the ring for this fight. It's a fight of our lives. Why? Because I don't know about you, but some of these areas I've been trying to change in my own strength for a long time, carrying them with me in my own life. They've dogged me. I don't know if you can look at that and say, man, they dogged me too. Yeah, this is serious stuff. When a boxer enters that ring and they look in that ring and the guy's like huge and they're like, uh-oh, I don't know if I want to do that, That's one of the reasons why they kind of have a robe on and they play that music to get them pumped up, so they have the courage to be able to get in the ring. And we need courage to even get in the ring, to say, all right, God, I know that I need to address my heart. And we need courage to do that because it's scary once our heart starts to open, because there's things in our heart that we've been very good at keeping hidden and keeping down, and we don't want other people to see, and we don't want God to see, even though God can see it, but we tell ourselves He can't. And we don't want other people to know about it either, that we struggle with these things. I mean, my goodness, I'm a leader at church. If people knew this, they'd go, oh no. So we try to keep these things. So it takes courage to be able to say, no, this is important, and because it's important, I have to admit certain truths about ourselves that we might not like to hear. But that's how change happens. And we might not want to do that, and we might dread it. But I want to give you a solace in that. We don't enter the ring for the fight of our lives alone. God is always with us. In fact, God never leads us anywhere where He will not be with us. The psalmist in Psalm 23, you probably heard that psalm. It says, even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, you're with me. God is always with us. And God is with us because He says, I've got you. And even though this may hurt to get exposed, it's where healing will begin. And I will do the work. Just keep with it. Keep with me. And God will never, even though there's going to be times where we might not feel it or we might not notice a whole lot of progress, we need to be able to trust that God is with us. As Israel and as the people go on from Sinai, they eventually come to God's promised land. And Moses dies. Their leader for all these years dies. And Joshua now is placed in as the new leader. And he's got to take them into the promised land. And they have to fight battles to take over the land. And he has to lead the people in all these battles. And he's got to do it. And he's never done that before. So right in the beginning of the book of Joshua, God addresses Joshua and says, I need you to do this. And in 3 verses, you know what he tells him 3 times? From verse 6 through verse 9 is be strong and courageous. In fact, look at verse 9. He says, have I not commanded you? I've just told you it 2 other times now. But be strong and courageous. Don't be frightened. Don't be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. That's the source of our courage. It's not in ourselves and saying, I can do this. No, God can do this. And God is with me wherever I go. You see, courage readies us for action. But the action is trusting in God. And since our courage it's not based in ourselves, it's based in God, right? It's not based in our strength. Then we also need something else to get into the ring, and that's humility. When we get into the ring, again, it's not about us. It's not saying, all right, I can do this. When we enter this ring for the fight, it's humbly. It's saying, I have no idea how this is going to work because it's not in me. And when we enter this ring for the fight of our lives, humility leads us not only to be honest with ourselves, but to be honest with God. And we say, God, help us. As we come to him for healing and strength, and we can say, all right, God, I need your help. Only you can do this. You see, it's not a battle we fight alone in our own strength. God is with us, but God is also for us. You know, the Psalmist talks about this in Psalm 25. He says, he, meaning God leads the humble in what is right, and he teaches the humble his way. You want to know the way to win this fight? You be humble. Because when we're humble, God shows us what is right. We don't have to guess. And he teaches us the way that we need to go and the way that we need to fight. See, this humility, it also enables us, though, to stand with others. It enables us to be able to come to others and say, hey, I need you beside me in this. And we can come to others and we can open ourselves up to others and say, I need your help as well. And it enables us to be able to help other people and not look down at people, because we know, guess what? We're all struggling with these things. Do you know that, look to the person next to you. Guess what? They're struggling with the fight of their life right now, just like you are. Because we all are. Because God isn't done working in any of us. So we can come together in humility and say, all right. And we don't have to be like the Pharisees where we look down at somebody and say, you're doing this wrong. Rather, it says, all right, how can we band together in community and do this together? Humility positions us for our fight of where we need to be and say, all right, God, this is you. And this humility, it also recognizes, again, that change is not something we do, but that God does in us. And this is why if we're going to enter this ring to fight, we not only need, courage and humility, but we need dependence. If we're going to enter the ring to fight, we need to enter it with dependence. Utter, desperate dependence on God. That's what trust is. Trust is not this heroic thing of superheroes where we say, yes, because I can trust in God. You know what trust is? Trust is clinging onto God for all he's worth, to say, I've got nothing beside this, so I'm going to stick with you because I've got nothing else. That's trust. That's saying, I've got nothing but you, and I know you can do this, so I'm going to cling to you no matter what happens. That's dependence. Dependence means we not only rely on God to produce in us the change that he desires. And we're saying, all right, God, you're going to produce this change in me. As my heart gets opened up, I'm going to bring it to you. And you're going to change my heart. Because again, only God can change our heart. Did you ever try to change your desires? We can't do that. That's our heart that needs to be changed. So even if we recognize our struggle, only God can overcome it for us. That's why we need Jesus. Because Jesus overcame all of this for us. We couldn't do it. And then he gives it to us. Dependence means we not only rely on God's strength, but we also rely on his timing. Because I don't know about you, but when a struggle gets exposed and something in my heart gets exposed, I want God to fix it. I'm like, all right, God, this is where I'm weak. Strengthen me. Got to get to work. I don't wear a watch, but if I wore a watch, I got to get to work. So you better do this quick. And you're like, all right, I don't want to deal with this any longer, so change me now. You know what? Sometimes God wants us to go through that struggle for a while so that we can rest with him even in the struggle. And he says, I'll change you. Just keep clinging. And what that does is it increases our faith with him. And sometimes that can be a challenge to do that, but God works in his timing. You know, the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel, if you ever want to read an interesting book, Ezekiel was a prophet, so he was a spokesman for God. And he was sent, in really bad times. Israel was involved in, they were just utterly lost with God. And they were doing some things that were just horrible. And Ezekiel was supposed to go to the people and say, return to God. God's going to send judgment, and you need to return to him. And Ezekiel's like, how are they possibly going to change? I've got nothing to tell them. I don't have a list of things. I don't have a slick way to do this. I'm not that guy. I can't do TED Talks or anything like this. What am I supposed to tell them? I can't make the people change. I'm not up to this task. So God gives them this message to share. It's in Ezekiel 36. And God says to them, don't worry about that. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and be careful to obey my rules. So Ezekiel's to go to the people, I know you're evil, and if you want to follow God again, God will put his Spirit in you, and God will cause you to walk in his ways. Isn't that awesome? God never tells us, all right, you're on your own. You got to get better, so get to work. I'll check on you in a week. Give you a couple lists to do. God doesn't do that. You know what God does? God changes us. And then he causes us to walk in his ways. And all of a sudden, and sometimes we don't sense it as we're going through this, but all of a sudden we turn around and we're like, wow, I see change that happened and I didn't even know it happened. Why? Because God changed our heart. See, and that's the dependence that God calls us to. And this means that God not only exposes our areas of struggles, but he wants to lead us through this. Because change is not up to us. You know what's up to us? Dependence. I don't know about you, but I'm great at being desperate. Right? We all. So that's what God wants in us. So as we enter this ring, and for this battle of our heart, and we're going to enter round 1, we need to enter with these things. So as we prepare ourselves for this fight of our life, my question is this: are you up for a fight? Do you recognize, man, I do need to see some things in my life. And I do now already see some of these areas where, wow, I've been fighting the wrong battle. And I'm up for this fight. Are you ready to see God shape you like you've never been shaped before? If you're ready to do that, here's the neat thing. God's going to expose our heart when we step into the ring like never before. But he's also going to change our desires and lead us into a life of unspeakable joy where Jesus is seen through us for all the world to see. His work in us. Real change, real growth, real life with God is found when we trust God to change our heart. And it takes courage, right? Courage to open our lives so that God can expose those areas he needs to work in us. And they're different for each of us. And it takes humility to follow God's agenda and to change, and dependence to rely on God's strength and timing to grow all of us. But as we go through these 10 rounds over the next several weeks, through God's 10 commandments, I want you to be ready. Because every time we enter the ring, great things happen. Because God is with us. So that's our call. So let's pull back the ropes and enter this ring for the fight of our lives as we look at God's 10 commandments, maybe in a different way you've ever looked at them before. So let's pray.